My God. Richard, is buy-to-let really worth it anymore? So here it is, Richard.
Yeah.
Over the last 5 years, life has become a little trickier for the landlords, with changes to their taxation status, mortgage interest relief being actually reduced by the Finance Act under Section 24, the additional 6% land buildings transaction tax for buy-to-let property, and 3% in England, obviously. It's made a lot of landlords actually ask themselves, to be honest, is buy-to-let really still worth this?
Yeah, that's
Stock market's riding at a record high today. It's like, should I know I just invested all my money in the stock market and just had an easy life? I did both, by the way.
I was just going to say, there are people that will argue the point that obviously for either side, and like you say, Jim, you have done both. But yeah, the big question is buy-to-let, and Fife still worth it. I think it's more importantly for us.
Fife, but we're talking about UK as well. I've also got a couple of questions that came in, and we've also got some advice about the rent freeze and the rent cap as well, and what you should be doing in terms of applications for your rent. We'll talk about these questions and that at the end, but let's get down to the body of the text. Is buy-to-let actually still worth this risk? I mean, regarding taxation, in 2015, the government added the 3% supplement, the land and buildings transaction tax or stamp duty or whatever it is, on all buy-to-let properties, although it's now 6% in Scotland. Then, in 2017, the government started to reduce mortgage interest under Section 24 of the Finance Act, 2015, if you want to be precise about the year, by stopping landlords from deducting interest on the mortgage they actually pay before the tax is calculated on the rental profits and replacing it with a flat rate credit of 20% of the interest they spend on the actual mortgage. This means actually that in cases where your interest is your interest charges is in your own name, remember this is if your interest charges are significantly more than the actual basic rate tax earners, then you will move yourself automatically into higher rate charge, because you have to earn enough rent anyway, or contribution to profits or overheads after before the interest is actually paid. You have to cover that. So, for example, if you've got 77, now this is my example years ago, if you've got £77,000 in interest payments, you would have to earn £77,000 after everything else is taken off from your rent before that, in order to cover that, just to make zero. Which means if you're earning £77,000, because that's how they calculate it, without earning anything else in your job, that's got to be added on as well, by the way. So you could be an example. I know somebody's a window cleaner that I know it has this situation, and they're having to pay 40% tax on their window cleaning. Hello? What? Because it's all in their name and they're stuck where they are. It's a lunatic, thing, but it is here to stay. And I've got to admit, though, we actually did take it. I was one of the test cases to the Treasury Select Committee by Roger Mullen when he was on the Treasury Select Committee. He was an MP, and he took it to them and actually said to them, "Look, this is Jim's scenario. He could earn that amount, but he will, if he makes zero, he will pay £5,000 in tax, even though he's not making any money as a landlord at all." And you know what the Treasury Select Committee said? Okay, that's what it is. What? Sorry? That's literally fell on deaf ears. Roger Mullen said, all we're really asking for is for you to review it in 6 months' time to the Treasury Select Committee. And they went, we're not really bothered. It'll just sort itself out. Nothing. They weren't bothered. Hence the reason why I switched my allegiance from that party to another party. And lo and behold, I've switched my allegiance again to someone. or I'm out on the fence. I mean, there's nobody with a clear way forward in terms of political party about what they are going to do and
clear
how
agenda
they engage with the private rented sector. That is my beef. There's nobody out there. Every single party seems to want to castigate the private rented sector, and yet we're the ones propping up the homelessness right now.
Yeah, housing.
Scotland has got its biggest homelessness crisis right now on Nicola Sturgeon's watch, and Patrick Harvey's watch, and Shona Robson's watch. It's all your fault, and yet we're propping them up. And what are they doing? They're whipping us while we're trying to prop these people up. That's a good analogy, isn't it?
Yeah, as I would
that's
say,
almost
that's
like
good enough.
that's almost like you know that one with the tree where they've got the saw in the branch. They're on one side where the tree is, we're on the end of the branch, and they're sawing it off.
Yeah.
While they're trying to solve homelessness.
Yeah.
And we're the people that can actually solve that for them. That is absolutely crazy.
That's lunacy. Yeah, I know.
I mean, there'd be no effect if a landlord were on a basic rate 20% taxpayer, by the way. If you're borderline and you're near enough the high rate taxpayer and it's all in your own name and you've got mortgage interest, then you will probably end up having to pay high rate tax on your income when it goes beyond that, which is a shame. Landlords who were at the higher rate or the top rate taxpayers at 46%, so the effect on the tax relief was basically cut in half. And as I say, this is people, you've got to understand here, Richard, as well, just to explain to you, this is people that are actually window cleaners. This is people that are cleaners that have maybe put their money aside, they've scrimped and they've saved and they've forgone things like their new car, they've forgone things like their holidays in the sun. They've invested for the future for their children and their children's children and their children's children's children, their great-great-grandchildren, to build some sort of legacy for them to pass down, to help them even on the property ladder or in education for further education costs and that. And these are the exact same people being castigated right now by our government at this point in time. The people in the offices just doing the basic jobs.
Yeah, general workers who are, like you say, saved.
Let's look at nurses.
Yeah.
They'll be doing that. School teachers are landlords as well. They'll be doing that. Rail workers, they're landlords as well. They'll be doing that. So not only are they getting the hit in their pay packet, they're also getting the hit through the taxation, and they're also getting hit in the fact that they're actually getting castigated as private landlords.
Yeah.
Vilified, I would use the word. So I'm going to ask you, Richard, is buy-to-let actually still an advisable investment?
Yeah, I mean, the response to that question is much more significant than just the issue of taxation, although that is important. Yep. And to a large degree, as with all investments, it depends on why you're investing and what your final objective is.
Yeah.
And I think we'll expand on that a wee bit here. Obviously, the rewards of a buy-to-let or a buy-to-let in Fife, particularly, obviously, because that's our area, you can earn money in two different ways with buy-to-let. And firstly, of course, the rental income for a property is the first source of income from buy-to-let. Now, the average rent in Fife achieved is just under £700 per calendar month at the moment. Now, that's a rise of 13.8% in the last 12 months, which is fairly significant, although that is the area as a whole. We see, obviously, we know it's broken up into certain areas and it differs slightly. You take a lot of higher rents and things into getting that average, but that is what the average is. Now,
the average as well, just to explain right across Scotland, the average right across Scotland as well, the average rent in Scotland is only increased by about 5%. I mean, Fife's been an exception because Fife's been way behind for years and years and years. You know yourself, I was charging £450 in 2006 for a 2-bedroom flat. And literally right now, we're getting about £495.
Yeah.
So in the space of 15 years, it's actually only gone up about, £30?
£25, £30, yeah.
Which is about 10% at the most in 15 years on an average 2-bedroom ex-local authority flat in some areas. Mm-hmm. So it balances itself out to a degree, but that's what they're saying. The average rent in Fife is, £700 per calendar month, a rise of 13.8% in the last 12 months. But across Scotland, it's only about 4 or 5%.
Yeah.
The rent is expressed as a yield. Well, let's explain what the yield is.
Yeah.
It's described as a percentage figure, and that's calculated using the annual rental income
Yeah.
So in other words, for example, if it's £500 a month, your annual rent is £6,000 for the year, dividing by the value of the property to let. So if it's £6,000 and your property is £100,000, then it's 6% as your yield. More importantly, though, the one I like is the fact that if you're borrowing, the gross yield that we talked about right now is thrown out the window completely.
And it's more than net, it's net, yeah.
It's what you want to measure as the net yield against the money in. Yeah, and what I mean by the net yield after the borrowing is you take your gross rent, you minus your interest charge, and you're left with, you know, the net amount for the month. You multiply that by 12 and then divide it by the money that you've actually put in. In other words, maybe the deposit, maybe a bit for refurbishment, maybe a bit for legal costs, ADS as well. You have to put additional dwelling supplement in there. That's the truer value. That's the truer measure that you want to do when you're actually doing property investment, unless you're buying for cash, which is very few and far between.
Yeah.
Very few people buy for cash. So that's the one you really want to do. Now, if anybody wants any further clarification on that, we're more than happy to do. We do private investor workshops where we invite people to private investor workshops. There is no upsell, by the way. There is no charge for it either. We don't want your money. We're not doing anything. All we're doing is we're educating people how to do this and how to maximize your returns and also create wealth. You probably end up seeing that Fife's probably a great area to invest in buy-to-let and then get to manage the property. That's where we're getting the upsell from, really. Landlords and buy-to-let investors use the rental yields, in other words, the gross yield, which is
gross, but more accurate way of doing it as the net yield.
What we talk about is can we say the gross yield after interest?
Okay.
Because we talk about net yield, and that's end result, isn't it?
Yeah.
So gross yield after interest, that's another measure. That's the true measure of the mortgage. So hopefully that's hit it home for everybody. And again, everybody on TikTok, Instagram, in here as well. If you want to ask questions, please ask questions all the way through. We will go through, we will go backtrack, and we will cover these questions and answer them at the end of the show. So if you want to ask any questions based on what we're doing right now, please ask them. We're not ignoring you. We just need to get through this to get the right flow for it. Because not everybody's going to want to know the answer to that question, and it keeps stopping and starting the process all the way through. So what's the average yield in Fife then?
Yeah, so you've done an example there, Jim, obviously, and I'm glad that you picked up on the gross yield after.
The gross yield after interest.
The gross yield after interest. That's a lot more accurate. But anyway, the average yield in Fife is 5.4%. Now, as I said, some areas in Fife could easily achieve more than that, maybe about 7%, maybe up to about 8.5%, and sometimes even more, depending on obviously your choice of property and what kind of property type it is, and the tenancy you wish to have as well. If yield is your number one focus, obviously, the highest yield, the average in the UK can be found in, obviously south of the border. There's places like Bradford City have yields where they have about 12%. Hanson Green and Radford and Nottingham have about 9.6%, and Pontypridd is about 8.7%. So there's areas in the UK that are really quite high, and there's also ones that are quite low. I mean, they go down as low as about 2.2%. So is the best strategy to go for the highest yield properties? Obviously, that again obviously depends on what your goal is and what you set out to do. The problem with pursuing high yield properties, especially in Fife and buy-to-let properties, they'll usually have to compromise on the property's capital growth, and they want to attain higher yields. So you're not going to have that capital appreciation if you've got, because you usually have to have properties that are already at a level where they're going to get a higher yield and a higher rent. So you're not going to have much as capital appreciation as you would maybe properties about middle of the road. You'll have quite a decent yield, but you'll also get that capital appreciation as well through time. A lot better than you would say new builds, for instance. You're going to get good return on them, probably higher yield, but you're not going to get that much capital appreciation, as an example.
Yep.
All right. So that's yields and things, I think, covered. But the second way to earn money with buy-to-let, like we just said, is capital growth. and as your Fife property increases in value, that is how you obtain capital growth. So, Jim, you want to touch on Fife property values?
Capital growth. It's quite an interesting subject because, you know, with my portfolio, I've never ever built for capital growth.
Yeah, and I think that's where it's dependent on your strategy.
And my strategy has always been cash flow every single month.
Yeah.
The most important thing for me is actually cash flow every single time because, you know, turnover is vanity, profit is sanity, and cash flow is king. That's the reality. It's not cash is king, by the way.
It's cash flow.
You know, basically, and I'll cash does nothing. This does nothing. This is a bit of paper or a bit of plastic. You know, that it's not worth anything really. It's not worth anything until you exchange it for something else or you invest it, and that's where it turns into cash flow because it flows from you to something else.
Yeah,
that's the most important thing. So cash is king. Get that out of your head. It's actually cash flow is king. The amount of cash flow that you generate is the most important thing because if you need to do repairs and improvements, or if you have a situation where someone can't pay the rent, you've got the cash flow tucked aside in order to put back in or reinvest in the stock. That's the most important part of this. The capital appreciation should always be a secondary aspect because the capital appreciation happens regardless. I mean, in the last 3 years, the capital has gone up about 28 to 30% in Fife alone. Now, there's no doubt about it. It's gone up significantly in the rest of the UK as well, and in other regions as well. I'd be interested to hear from everybody else where your regions are and what they've gone up in price as well in the last 3 years or last 2 years. There's probably a few estate agents and letting agents watching just now, and what the average rent is as well. I'll be interested to hear that as well from the letting agents and the estate agents out there. The capital value is probably a secondary aspect, but the great thing about the capital value, it gives you a lot more leverage. So what do I mean by that? Well, it gives you leverage in the principle that you can use that capital value built up because your loan, as your mortgage stays, this is the debt reduction deficit, where your mortgage stays the same value all the time. If you're doing interest only, you might want to do interest capital repayment, and that's sometimes a good strategy for people with high loan to value. But you've got debt reduction strategy because your mortgage stays the exact same value all the time, while the price of the property actually goes up. So that's where you start to leverage it because your loan to value becomes lower. Therefore, when it comes round to renew your mortgage or get another deal, your loan to value is a lot lower. Therefore, you're less of a risk. Now, I'll tell you how less of a risk the UK economy in terms of the housing market is right now to everybody. And this is a fact, this statistic. The total amount of mortgages in the UK economy right now total 1.7 trillion. Have a guess what the total value of property in the UK economy is. Guess?
You want me? I think it'll be less.
Have a guess. Total value of UK property as opposed to mortgages.
Right, okay. I don't know, Jim. Enlighten us.
8 trillion.
8 trillion, right.
The loan to value of the total mortgages in the UK economy versus the total equity in UK property is 20% loan to value. Okay, so if we're going to have a property crisis, for example, and I'm going off the beaten track here, and property drops 20 or 30%, do you think the loan to value is really going to bother the banks?
No.
Because they've got huge amounts of equity built in. They've got 80% equity already. If we all lose 30% of our equity, some people will go to the wall because they're leveraged up to the hilt, but very few. If we lose all the equity, 30% of the equity, we've got 50% left. And that's still covering the bank for the 20%. So how do you think that affects the liquidity of the banks? It doesn't. So for people out there saying, we're going to have a property crash, the banks are going to fall apart. It's like, we're not ever. It's practically impossible unless it drops to 80% and prices drop 80%. That's the only way we're ever going to have a position where we've got the same amount of mortgages and the same value of property. But that'll never happen. And I will say never. Because people say never, because it might. No, it won't. Don't be stupid. If you're thinking that to yourself, don't be stupid. And these people out there that peddle that doom and gloom crap, that's all It's all BS. I'm getting frustrated because you hear it all the time, don't you? On TikTok, on social media, on Instagram, and you've got all these doom and gloom mongers out there peddling the same thing on different platforms. It's not, by the way, when you look at it, the people that are peddling it are not these actual people. What they're doing is taking, so for example, when Kiyosaki came on and says, we're going to have a catastrophic crash in this market and that market, you don't actually see it on Kiyosaki's platform. It's actually on somebody else's. It's got no connection with him at all. So they've actually half-inched it, in other words, pinched it from his platform and repurposed it onto their platform to get likes or get, get clicks and to get traction. That's what they're doing it for. Now, this could be completely out of date because that soundbite could be from 2 years ago. Because I've seen this time and time again. Because I watched Charlie Munger, I watched Warren Buffett, I watched Kiyosaki, I watched Grant Cardone, and all this stuff. And I see these all the time. And the fact that they're just repurposed content, were actually not applicable to this point in time. But because it suits the agenda of the person peddling the doom and gloom, that's why they use it. So just be aware of that in your mind about where that message is coming from and why people are doing that. Always look for it. Plus, always look for the downside. I mean, even I see the economy has actually been quite robust, believe it or not. And I don't actually think, I'm beginning to think now, we're actually not going to go into recession at all, because it seems to go, oh, we're going to be in a real bad recession, to, oh, well, it's going to be a bit better than we think, to, it's maybe a bit better than we think now. However, I do see a position where I think interest rates might climb higher than we expected, because I can't see them bringing inflation down to half of what it is right now, unless something dramatically changes. But I'm sure conveniently the oil nations could have another war just to push the prices up even more. That's my conspiracy theory. This is what it's not a theory, it's probably a fact, to be honest. So you've got to wonder who profits out of these situations. Anyway, let's go back to property prices. So 28% higher in the last 3 years. It's reasonable return in anybody's books. Of course, it all depends on the rent coming in. While you can buy landlord insurance to cover the loss of any rental income, tenant damage, or legal costs. But interestingly enough, the government data and industry data has found that the first lockdown, landlords who manage their rental, this is actually a really good one. This is a really good one. This is why I always say to people, you probably should have a letting agent doing your business. Now, it differs, because I did have somebody on one of the Scottish Landlord Network, for example, sitting saying today, is this usual, where my letting agent actually orders the same fridge freezer that I've got in there just now because the other one's broken, and it's £450, and yet when they go on to AO.com, it's 273. Wait a minute.
Where are they ordering it from?
Aye, where are they getting it? So that's why you have to be aware of what letting agent you're using. They're not all the same, by the way. So just take that in mind. Not everybody's the same.
No.
Just because they look and smell like that, it doesn't mean to say they'll taste like that, if that makes sense to people.
Yeah, it does.
So interestingly enough, this is a fact again, another fact. So the research found that the first lockdown, landlords who managed their rental properties themselves were 272% more likely to be in 2 months arrears or more, compared to the ones that utilised the services of a letting agent to manage their property. Why do you think that is, Richard?
I think, there's several things that can cause that. Obviously, your letting agent is more adapt to obviously keeping on top of your ears and keeping in contact with the tenants and things. But I think that there's also that better relationship as well. And then sometimes the lines get blurred with tenants and self-managed landlords, because they think, oh, it's fine. Whereas there's a good relationship with letting agents, they deal with it on a more professional level, and it's more kind of followed through on, and there's a wee bit more clout with it. And if I say that kind of word, if that makes sense. So there's a few different factors, but here's what
my thoughts are on this. Most people see letting agents as money for old rope for the letting agent, because they believe they do nothing and they just collect the money and take a commission. The reality is what goes on behind the scenes is completely different to what actually anybody sees. But you should actually, ideally, be looking for a letting agent where you think they're getting money for all rope and actually everything's going perfectly. And believe
they're
me,
doing a lot in the background.
That is the wrong time, though, to actually then say, maybe I should just self-manage it because it seems to be going okay. Because it's probably only going okay because the letting agent's doing all the work in the background. And you're about to take all that work on without actually knowing. And we're just making a wild assumption that, oh, everything must be going okay because I'm getting my rent and there's never any calls or never any bother. So I'll just take the rent on, I'll take the tenant on myself. But that's the exact same type of letting agent you probably want, because then it means there's nothing going wrong. The money's always coming in. The property's always been looked after. And more importantly, the tenant's always happy.
Yeah.
Job done.
It's still been the first time in the past where landlords have had that approach. They're like, look, everything's going fine. I'll just do it myself. And I'm like, there's a reason everything's going fine and you're not hearing any issues because we're dealing with them. We're sorting things. Yeah. And then lo and behold, they'll come back a year later and be like, could you take this back because you were obviously doing something that I'm not. And that's why things were running smoothly in the first place. So that's happened before.
I tell you what as well, this has popped into my mind, just talking about letting agents, beware of a sheep in wolf's clothing. Have you ever heard that expression?
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is I saw the other day, actually, somebody went on and said, I've been appointed the managing director of my company. That's absolutely brilliant. And everybody went, congratulations, 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 congratulations. And then I looked up his company. It has no employees.
Yeah.
And it's not worth the paper it's written on. So he's the managing director of himself. But do you see how that could be misleading? I've got a flashy company, and I've got a flashy title, and everybody falls into line with that. So again, do your due diligence out there. Even on people like me, I keep telling them that. I keep telling people, do your due diligence on us. Fife Properties Limited, Tigger and Timmy Limited, Buddy and Buster Limited, Limited. Do all the and once you get in there, you see a director. You click on the director, and it tells you all the companies they're a director of, and then you can go and look at these company accounts as well. It's all public information for limited companies with Companies House. So do your due diligence on people beforehand. Make sure that's the case.
And I also say as well, always hold potential letting agents and things that you're considering using them, hold them to task. Ask them questions that you think, right, well, what about this? If it's legislation, if it's compliance, do you know what I mean? Ask them anything. They should be able to tell you really on the spot. There's very few questions that they should have to be like, well, I have to go and check that. Obviously, to retain all that information is quite difficult, but the main basis of that should be up here because I know it is in mine anyway. So
absolutely,
and I would ask anybody who wants to obviously ask me questions. Feel free to do that.
Here's the drawback of buy to let.
Yeah,
your tax bill is higher today than a few years ago, but isn't everyone's. If property prices actually fall, the capital you invested will reduce. Yet, if it's sat in the bank, it would probably decline in value anyway, I suppose. But at least it's safe as houses in the bank.
I was just going to say, at least it's what, Jim?
At least it's there and it's tangible. You can feel it, but it devalues because you're not getting the right return as opposed to inflation. Whereas property is actually outperforming inflation every single time over the medium to long term, and we know that. The last 20 years, property prices have gone up 170%. Inflation's gone up 70%. Hello. And it's still people think. And plus the fact you're actually earning rent on it as well. And that's not even taking that into account. Gold doesn't do that. Silver doesn't do it.
Crypto doesn't do it.
Crypto definitely doesn't do it. Crypto's gambling, by the way. So being a landlord's a big responsibility with over 170 pieces of legislation and orders to comply with. That's where a suitable letting agent can help you with rental property to ensure you actually remain compliant. Compliance is the most important thing here. If you can tick all the boxes, I've just gone through it with the client money purchase scheme, the government approved scheme actually to protect tenants' deposits and landlords' income as well. It's a client account, specially put aside. You can't touch it. If you go out of business, that client account is protected. That money is protected in there as well, and it ensures that all the rents can still be paid. All the deposits can be sent to safe deposits as well, because we use the custodial scheme for them as well. That'll all be protected and ring fenced, and then also any other income that's in there for repairs and improvements for it to be paid to contractors are protected as well. even though your business goes away. Now, I was talking to Elaine this morning, my wife, and I was saying, see that person walking past going into the swimming pool? I don't know how she could so hold her head up high, because her and her husband ran away with £250,000 worth of tenants' deposits. How could anybody do that? How could anybody hold their head up high, knowing damn fine?
There's a few that have done that over the years.
And they got away with it scot-free.
Yeah.
Scot-free. Anyway, that's another boring.
Yeah, that's a different story.
I remember all
Didn't get launched on that.
Yeah, I remember all these things, and this all comes back to haunt people eventually for what I would say is their sins, because they knew damn fine what they were doing, taking money out every single month, knowing fine the money's coming out of the deposits to pay for their lifestyles. But that's another story. I would recommend landlords actually consider all options to maximise their rental income, which will reduce their outgoings concerning the rental property itself. Rents are actually rising in Fife still, because remember, when the tenant changes over, you're allowed to set it at the market rent for the next property. So they can't do anything about that at all. And many landlords appreciate the demand-led increases in their rent as well. So also let me ask you, why shouldn't they? As they've been exposed to many legislative changes, taxation changes over the last 5 years, plus the fact that they're actually inflation as well going up. So why would that not be the case? We'll talk about the elephant in the room in a minute.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the rent freezes now.
I was just going to say that's a good point to talk about that, Jim. Yeah.
Yeah, Richard, rent freezes. What's this all about? I mean, what is the rent freeze and what could people do?
So the rent freeze obviously was brought in with the cost of living the legislation. Now, initially it was meant to be reviewed 31st of March. Now that's going to be extended now, we know, till September, but you can apply, you can implement a 3% rent increase from the 1st of April. And then you can further apply to do a 6% increase. But you do have to obviously show evidence of increased mortgage rates or increased insurance costs, or if you've got maybe factoring fees and things that have went up, which undoubtedly they probably have, to do the 6%. Now, Jim, you and I were talking on Monday, and we looked into this a wee bit about, can you actually put this 6% in place and then apply to the rent service, obviously, for them to grant the fact that you could do that? Obviously, thinking of time scales, because, I mean, it's 3 months to put the rent increase in place through the private residential tenancy and things. So you need to try and think of the most efficient way.
We know what we know, Richard. Okay, for people that don't know this, you cannot put your 3% increase notice through to your tenant until the 1st of April.
Yes.
If you put it before that, or any 6% before that, and say it's coming, you're not allowed to do it. So basically what the government's doing is they're getting away with 3 months free gratis. That's what they're doing in the rent increase, because it has to be 1st April onwards. It's 3% or it's 6%. We would recommend putting 3% or 6% or whatever it is you're wanting to do if you want to do the rent increases, but put them in straight away, because you've got 3 months to go before it is actually actioned. Now, the 6% put through, but then also apply to the rent assessor at the same time to justify. Now, the 6% is calculated if it's justified. You have to demonstrate clearly that it's either 6% of the rent or your costs have gone up and it's the lower you can have. So in other words, if my rent was £500 a month and it's 6%, that's £30, isn't it? So it's an extra, is it an extra £30? 6%, 500? Yeah, extra £30. Get me thinking. What? Yes, it's £30. I'm sure it. You got the calculator? Yeah,
it's £30. Yeah.
So that's £30. It's gone up, the rent, and that's what I'm trying to get. If my costs, for example, interest costs, insurance costs, what other costs can we think about?
Factor fees and building
fees,
apartment blocks and things.
Yeah, things like that. If these costs had gone up only £20 per month, I would only be able to instigate, if it's a pass by the rent assessor, the £20 a month increase. I will not be allowed to get the 6% anymore, because I can only justify my costs have gone up. This is to stop you go, well, this is basically the government trying to stop increasing rents, and I don't know where they're going with that, because they're just putting people off in the rental market and actually exiting the market. Therefore, homelessness has gone up. Did I mention under the Scottish Government's watch, homelessness is at its highest ever at a crisis point? And did I also mention they've only ever built for the whole of Scotland 5,000 social houses every single year for the whole of Scotland? 5,000 for the last 11 years. And the Thatcher government has built more than them by 12% in their time, in the same time. That is so funny. That will really grate on the current administration. The fact that the Conservatives have actually built more social housing in Scotland in the same time period as the current government in the last 11 years. Amazing, eh? What does that say about their priorities? Anyway, we'll move on. So that's where we are in terms of the rent increase. You can apply for it after the first. It has to be, it's the lower of whatever the cost is, you can justify it. Your costs have gone up, or the 6%. That's it. So if your costs have gone up £60 and you've got a £30 rent increase, you're only getting £30. You're not getting the 60, whether you like it or not. That's it in a nutshell. What else do we need to cover in terms of the rent freeze and the rent increases? Is there anything else that we need to get? Situations where your rent can still be increased. This is actually quite a really good one as well. By the way, if you're living in university or college or purpose-built student accommodation, the rent increase notice between the 20th of October 2022 and 30th of March 2023 is not valid. But from the 31st of March, in other words, the 1st of April onwards, your landlord can increase your rent by the following rent increases by following the rent increase procedure in a written contract. So it does no longer applies for student accommodation from the 1st of April onwards in university or purpose-built student accommodation. It doesn't apply to social housing providers as well, because they've got a separate agreement. Arm up, leg, or whatever it is, and handshake, or whatever that is, for the social housing providers and the government.
Sorry.
Apology for the Masons, by the way. I'm not doing it. I'm just saying.
One thing I'll add,
the secret code of how they do things.
Yeah. One thing I'll add as well, Jim, is if by any chance in the last 12 months before the initial rent freeze come in to force, if you had put a rent increase in place, you can't do another one within that 12 months. Yeah,
that's right. That's a valid point, isn't it? So if you've done a rent increase in the last 12 months, you can't put this rent increase through. It won't be allowed. Situations where your rent can still be increased on different types of tenancies, then the rent cap will not apply. Your rent can still be increased if you have an assured tenancy, where your contract has a tenancy increase written into it. So that's things like short assured. So if you've been in your property all these years, short assured, that can still apply. There's no many with short assureds in. I've probably still got short assured some of them as well.
You still got a few.
A tenancy that started before 1989, that's called a regulated tenancy. Jeez, regulated tenancies are terrible. That's even worse, believe it or not. That's why regulated tenancies, and they're in place, are almost lifetime tenancies where the tenant lives till they die, and you can only increase it by a marginal amount every single year. In other words, these type of tenancies, when you try to sell that property on, the property is worth about a third of what the market value is, and you can't do anything about it unless the tenant moves out, and you can't put them out at all. That's because they're regulated. If it's a lodger agreement where you live with your landlord, an agricultural tenancy, that's usually associated with connected to farm workers, or some other common law tenancies. That's where you can do it. Hopefully that's given everybody clarification. We will cover that at the end if there's any questions about that in here, but we won't cover it just now. Let's go on and talk about elephant in the room.
Just got to say, the elephant.
So what's the question? What's the question that you want to ask me, Richard?
So, will there be a house price crash, and should Fife landlords wait for it?
Yeah. So, will there be a house price crash? Should landlords wait for it? Well, let's cover this in a wee bit of detail here and explain the background for it. Now, I think you know where we're going with this, because we've discussed this a wee bit in detail earlier on in the show. House price crash actually conjures up a big event that makes house prices go down, and it certainly happened like that in 1988, for example, with the removal of the dual MIRA's tax relief on mortgages, which we got automatically just because we had a mortgage. Normal homeowners got that, so most people won't know about that. And it also did in the credit crunch of 2008. Yet this time it's actually quite different. As there's more normality and balance in the property market at the moment compared to 2021 and 2022, the price that's been paid today on most houses in Fife, for example, and surrounding areas, and even in Scotland and England, are not that extreme as they're extravagant as what they were being paid in 2021 and early 2022 when people were outbidding each other.
Yeah.
It's kind of the same. I mean, folk are going, prices might crash, or their house prices have come down for the 6th month in a row, says the Halifax. And it's like, okay, so we're back to spring last year. What's your point? But it's a frightening headline to some people, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I only bought a spring last year, so why does it affect me? It doesn't. I've not lost anything because I'm still staying in the property. I'll go back to the example I always gave. I bought my property for 260,000 in 2004 or 5, spent 100,000 on it, so 360,000. Credit crunch came along, and immediately it was devalued to 300,000. I've lost 60 grand, but today it's worth 450,000. I've lost nothing, and I've still not lost it, and I've still not gained it until I have actually gained it because I've locked it in because I've bought my next property anyway. So this house is no longer as a trade to get my next house because my next house is already bought and I'm renting it just now. Yeah. And then I'll move in and I'll rent it as well off my kids in a limited company. Yeah. But that's another story. That's a really good tax planning issue, by the way. So the more normality, and we're basically going back to where we were maybe a year ago, if that's the case. Therefore, if you were to look at the house price indexes going into the spring and summer of 2023, which we are right now, then there will probably be a reduction because it's coming through already. But we're getting masked by, we're still taking into account the last 12 months. So it's been masked by the increases the previous months in the beginning. The 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then one drops off and another one adds on. So the negative adds on, the positive, it was at the beginning, drops off in the 12-month cycle when it comes through. So eventually it will start to record at house prices. And that's why we see it going down from, the meteorite rise of 13% to now 12% to 10% to 9% to 8% is sitting at right now for the Fife area. Yeah. So that's the sort of things you see coming through, and eventually it will peter off and level out possibly, and it might go to a negative, but I don't think that's unexpected. The market's factored that into account as well. You can see the Halifax, you can see the Lloyds, you can see, for example, Santander. They were talking about the other day saying we think property prices will go down 10% this year. I could say the words "no shit, Sherlock." it's like we've all been talking about that for the last 6 months. Where have you been, Santander? It's like this isn't the news, by the way. We knew this is a possibility, and more or less the whole market's factored for this. So why they would come out with it in 2 or 3 days ago is beyond me. It's like, have you been somewhere else lately? Have you been away on holiday for 6 months? So that's where we are right now. It's more normality. The doom mongers and newspaper editors will all call that really a house price crash when it's only moving a small amount. Yet, as I see it, the market is easing back really to normality. Now, a massive driver behind landlords and home buyers waiting for a house price crash is that they fear that they'll have missed the boat when it comes to buying and investing. It's the fear, it's the FOMO thing. It's the fear of missing out. This is what the drivers behind this. There's always a newspaper or a social media, and now social media, attention when the house prices explode. This means that people quickly feel pressure to enter the property market as everyone is making money, yet they aren't. They're entering the property market thinking they're making money. They're not. They're not making money at all. The problem is that during the previous boom phases in the late 1980s and the mid 2000s, house prices increased quicker than some people could save money for their deposit. for a house purchase. They saw their friends and acquaintances snapping up buy-to-let deals that they were missing out on the spoils of the house price growth. As a result, many of these excluded house buyers judged that a house price correction was foreseeable, inevitable, and sometimes even needed. Not with any rational economic argument, but classic FOMO, fear of missing out.
Fear of missing out. That's a fear thing.
Yeah, a house price crash isn't the silver bullet that many will think it will be. House price crashes virtually never drop house prices to reasonable levels, and in fact, they have a lot of additional effects that make house buying even harder when they actually happen. So invest in buy-to-let long-term investment. Remember what I said at the start. It would help you decide why you're getting into buy-to-let investment and when will and really what will you get out of it and what you want to get out of it. Buy-to-let has advantages and disadvantages, but with some tangible and something that investors can understand. The UK really needs to build more houses, so demand for rental properties will only continue to grow. Let me say that again. The UK needs to build more houses, and if they don't, the demand for buy-to-let will only continue to grow. And if you hear it landlords are exiting the market, you should be having your flags out and shouting hurrah, especially if you're a landlord, because they need you more than ever, and they are the government and the bodies that actually represent and try to home people as a result. The homelessness crisis. This is where you get them over a barrel. Yeah. They have no choice. You can't just tomorrow magically out of thin air produce a house. There's infrastructure that has to go in. There's planning. There's conditions. There's bigger planning. Anybody that's played SimCity years and years ago, and probably some things that, it
happens. Versions there as well, Jim.
You know what you've got to do to build a city. You've got to then work out how much shops do I need? How many health centres or doctors do I need? How many school places do I need? Do I need to build another school? How much capacity for gas and electricity do I need to generate for that area that I'm actually going to build? And that takes ages. And do you know why? It's called committees.
Yeah, because they need approval. They need approvals to do
ages to do anything. They can't do what buy-to-let landlords can do. They can't just go, I'll buy a house, I'll rent a house. This is what I used to do with the council years ago when they did the private sector leasing. I used to toodle them along with me to the viewing of the house. I used to take the officials to the house and go, what do you think of this one? Do you like this one? Would this service your private sector leasing? And all the rest of it, they go, yeah, this is great. Great, I'll buy it. Job done, tenant moved in. That's it. I've got a guaranteed tenant in tow right now with me. I even used to do that with some tenants. Come in with a viewing with me. I know you're looking for a house with me. Come to the viewing with me. Have a look at this house, and I'll tell you what I'm doing. If you like this house, I will buy it. That's how to get demand. Yeah. Bring it with you. And that's what position we are in right now as landlords. The government would make us think that we're basically vilified by them. Yeah. Make us think that we should be running for the hills, when in actual fact, by consolidating with ourselves under one umbrella, and it's called the Scottish Association of Landlords, we could pull together and have a universal voice. And that universal voice will shout so loud that the government won't be able to ignore what we say. We will have the power for that purpose. But that needs landlords out there to join, and letting agents, by the way, to join the Scottish Association of Landlords.
Yeah,
I'm a member as well.
As a united front and a voice, as a combined voice. Yeah.
To be honest, Richard, I don't need to be a member because I know everything there is to need to know, and I don't need advice from them at all on anything. You know that, because I've been at this for 30 years and I still learn every single day, and so do you as well. So we don't need the advice, but we need to put our collective voice together and put it behind SAL, the Scottish Association of Landlords. in order to have that voice for us, so they can communicate. Because the government just wants to communicate with one body. That's why they were able to say to the social housing providers, yeah, we could do a deal. That's the rental increase you could have. Is it beyond inflation? Absolutely. But you're all agreeing universally. There's one person to deal with. That's it. Job done.
Yeah.
They said quite clearly they don't actually know who to communicate to agree with private landlords. Therefore, they're only going to have to put 3 and 6% in for that reason. And that only 3 and 6% was given as the result of the Scottish Association of Landlords negotiation. That was all. Yeah. That was a last-minute emergency meeting because I highlighted the fact that there's no spoken to anybody. and they went, oh my God. Maybe and they said, we've got nobody to speak to. And I went, well, funny enough, you're actually approving the Scottish Association of Landlords and landlord accreditation to train and accreditate landlords and also letting agents. And now you're telling me you've not got a universal body to actually communicate with to agree a universal rate for increase. And then that's when they went, oh my God, we better call them in.
Yeah.
Within the 2-day period of me announcing that. So that was great news. Yeah. But I can't stress enough that that's got to be done. Anyway, build more houses. If you want rid of private landlords, and I say it every single time, build more houses, but don't build more houses, build more social housing. That's the key. Yeah. I'm the biggest fan ever, and you know I'm the biggest fan ever of council houses, not social housing providers, because they just make a profit to keep themselves in a job. The council have a different agenda to look after people and provide housing, adequate housing for the community. That's why we should build council houses, more affordable housing, built by the council, governed by the council, controlled by the council. That's the way forward. If you want rid of private landlords, Nicola Sturgeon, Patrick Harvey, Shona Robson, you need to build more council houses. But that's going to take time. And for that time, you've got us, whether you like us or not. However, you're losing a lot of us right now. And that is why homelessness is at a crisis point in Scotland at this point in time, because of your draconian and vilifying attitude towards private landlords. I hope I've made that clear. I might actually tag them in this when I share it. So the heady days of the 2000s, when anybody could make money from property, though, have actually gone. With increased legislation and taxation, you need the advice of a great agent who can guide you to what you want to buy, what you need to buy, and not what not to buy, more importantly as well, for an excellent yield, incredible capital growth, or a balance of the two, actually.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what, as I say, it depends. It depends. Like I say, I use obviously newer builds and things in certain areas which are higher value already, obviously, and then you're getting a higher yield. I'm not going to really have much capital appreciation, but there's areas where you're going to get both.
Do you know, I was getting told the other day at the most lucrative Airbnb in Fife is in one of the worst areas of Fife.
Really?
And it's the most lucrative. It's got 5 stars for everything. And this person makes an absolute fortune out of it. And I'm not telling anybody where that area is. I do have several houses there, by the way. Right. I wasn't daft.
That doesn't narrow it down much, Jim. It could be a lot of places.
But this is, and it's one of the most lucrative areas. And just so happens there's a train station going right down at the bottom of the hill. That'll tell you where it is. Yeah, for people that know. Train station right at the bottom of the hill. Cha-ching. Capital value goes straight up. But it's a great area for Airbnb as well. And that's how I kind of started when I first started being a landlord. Yeah, I just made sure that the accommodation was mint condition. Yeah. It was perfect for everybody to move into. And that's why the occupancy rate went sky high. The agent that should find you the great tenant will pay the rent on time and look after the property, ensure that they look after the property when they leave. Your investment is returned actually in the best possible condition when they do that. Final words, Richard. And we'll go to questions after this.
Yeah, obviously we're going to go to questions, but I think that's a good point you made there, Jim, about agents and agents that can advise you of the best things to do and maybe the things not, and obviously the things not to do as well. I mean, I'm happy to let people pick my brain, whether they're considering becoming a landlord or you're already a landlord, then feel free to do that. I think to bring us back to the question, obviously, of today, is buy-to-let and Fife still worth the risk? I think it really comes back to what people are setting out to do and what their goal is. Now, if you're a new landlord and things, are you looking to build up a portfolio and or an investor, should I say, for the long term? Because if you're in it for the long term and you do all your due diligence in the beginning, then you shouldn't have to worry too much. You'll reduce your risk. People that are in it for the short term and maybe just looking for a quick gain, then that's a different story. So I think we've demonstrated that quite well today. But yeah, anything lettings, property related, please feel free to speak to me anytime.
Yeah, and before I go to questions, you were going to ask me, probably more than likely, do I think buy-to-let is still worth it?
Yeah. That's the
if
question.
you can show me an investment vehicle, it returns more than buy-to-let at this point in time, I'll do that as well.
Yeah.
Because I tell you what, buy-to-let is probably one of the best investment vehicles, medium to long term, you'll ever get. Regardless, the most important thing is to understand the numbers. If you get the numbers right, everything else falls into place. And I talk about it time and time on the wealth creation shows as well, is I know the answer before I start the journey. So I know what it's going to get and reward I'm going to get and buy-to-let before I even buy the property, because I understand the numbers. And if I get the numbers right in the beginning, it's a natural conclusion that the result at the end is going to be there. Now, I tell you what, most of the time it goes better than I actually planned for, because I'm quite conservative, well, small c, by the way, or prudent, because that's how I'm trained as an accountant. So I tend to work on that side. So most of the time, it's an added bonus on top of that. Capital appreciation is an added bonus as well. And it just allows you to leverage your position to possibly buy a bigger portfolio later on, which is what I'm doing right now. And the very fact that I've just announced I'm buying a bigger portfolio right now should tell you that buy-to-let is absolutely a cracking business to be in, still, regardless. As Warren Buffett says, when everybody else is leaving the market, their opportunity is now to buy.
Yeah.
That's really it. When everybody else is fearful, that's when your opportunity arises. And this is where it is right now in terms of the buy-to-let market. So hopefully that's given everybody an insight. I'm going to answer this question. Davey actually says to me, he's pulled 35,000 out of his buy-to-let, one of his buy-to-lets, and he's ready to put it into the next project. He was going to buy another buy-to-let, but the way the S&P and the Green government's going with private landlords, he was thinking of investing money into doing up the house instead of buying another buy-to-let, and just wanted to know what my thoughts were. Davey, I actually think if the numbers are right, just buy another buy-to-let. You know, the 6% ADS should never put anybody off if it's at the right price, because the 6% is inconsequential. You could see that over the years. You know, everybody's going, oh, I'm not doing it for 4%. I'm not doing it for 4%. And then property prices in the last 3 years have gone up 30%. You only paid 4%. So you've instantly made 26% if you bought it just before that happened. And if it's 6% and property prices over the next 10 years even went up 30%, you've still made 24% on the 6% that you've paid in the beginning. You could factor in things like inflation and the use of capital, and you could have used it elsewhere and the opportunity cost as well. But it's still a damn sight more than the 6% that you've actually just outlaid in the beginning. If property prices went up 30% in the next 10 years. That's my point. Plus the fact, if you're earning revenue from it as well, that's not even factored into account either. So why would it know? Again, I come back to saying, if the numbers make sense, go ahead and do it. Absolutely. And I'm still doing it, and it won't change. Just hedge your position. So I've got a huge amount outside of this in pensions and other property, which is not connected with my buy-to-let business. So it could all disappear tomorrow, and I'd still be okay. I'd still be fine. And that's where but in the very beginning, really, I did take the attitude of Monte Carlo or bust. And it was like all or nothing here, definitely. And I suppose it's like that now, to a degree, but I know I've got a certain amount hedged anyway, because I had to for my wife. Or I would have been Monte Carlo or bust.
Yeah. All that.
I couldn't care less if I went back to living in a tent. Or if I was homeless, it wouldn't make any difference for me. I just love the journey.
Yeah.
And that's what they don't understand. It's the journey. If you love the journey, and you've got the results planned. It's only a matter of time before you get there. So it's to devise a method how quick you can get there to the result you're after. It's instead of going zigzag all the way up the road, if you can have a road which is tarmacked and in a straight line, you can just get in your car now and you can just drive that straight line to the destination you're going for. And that's effectively what how I've systematized everything that I do. It's just a straight line now. There's no zigzags anymore. It's like, I know exactly where I'm going. I know exactly who to talk to, what to do, how to get there, and what process to put in place. In a nutshell. So yes, your answer, Davey, is I would reinvest it in another buy-to-let. I wouldn't put it into because when you think about it, you're also, let's look at that 35. If you put it into an existing property and it's paying money, if they stop paying the rent there, you've lost that money. If you go and buy another buy-to-let and that's paying rent, and the other one stops paying rent, you've got two now. You spread your risk. Yeah. You spread your risk for that reason. Then the 6% becomes more inconsequential because you're spreading your risk. I would rather have 100 Coca-Cola machines earning 1% each than one Coca-Cola machine earning 100%. This is what my mentors used to talk about. And I was like, well, why would you? You wouldn't want the hassle. You just want, well, if your Coca-Cola machine just so happens to be in the worst place in Glasgow, there'll not be anything left it and it'll be stolen. So you'll have no income at all. So if you've got 100 earning 1% and 5 of them go down, you're still earning 95% of your income. Yeah. May cost a wee bit of service and all the rest of it, but if you get somebody else to do it and that's factored into the 1%, then why are you bothered? That's what I think is the most important point. Yeah. Okay, let's take some questions. Okay. That's that one. Francis actually says, when you're wanting to buy a house, do you need a deposit? Absolutely, yeah. Francis. You always need a deposit now. You can actually get away with, I think, well, we could put you in touch, Francis, if you want. We can put you in touch with a mortgage broker. I think you still get as little as 5% deposits on houses.
There is still some that are 95%. Yeah.
There's still 95% mortgages out there. And with the way things are going now and the stress testing, I've got a funny feeling they might even do a bit more. For people that have actually got equity just now, you can use sometimes, your current financial position without cashing in anything to actually
leverage
to leverage yourself to be able to get a higher lending rate. Yeah, that's what I'm doing right now. Okay, let's do some TikTok stuff. I hope you've no done neggy stuff on TikTok, you lot. Why wouldn't buy-to-let properties be worth the risk? That was Greg. Greg, hopefully we've just covered that for you.
I was just going to say we've more or less covered that in the show and the risk factor.
It's all about the numbers. Yeah, and Scrumdog says not all houses are mortgaged though. Absolutely, that's what I said. Yeah. 8 trillion worth of houses in the UK, 1.7 trillion in mortgages. Where's the risk to the banks? And then, your answer is, should I buy-to-let use or so-and-so? Yeah, absolutely. If the numbers make sense. Again, get advice from people that know what they're talking about.
Yeah.
What would be your typical OPEX? I'm not really sure what that means. To calculate your next rent, your net rent from your gross rent. Oh, OPEX. Well, I think he's maybe talking about what we had done.
Yeah, Yeah, that's like so
if you've got a mortgage, just to explain to you again, if you've got a mortgage, your gross yield isn't the measure you should be doing. You should be doing the gross yield after the mortgage interest is deducted against the money in. That's the most important point. Actually, let's show a one in here. I'm quickly going to show this here, Richard. Here's one I made earlier in the true fashion of Blue Peter. Here we are here. So number of properties, 1. We have 75,000 for a 2-bedroom flat.
Yeah.
Or thereabouts. Some could be 6%, 32%. Just say mortgage interest for an individual or limited company, it's probably around about 5% now. Mm-hmm. It could be 5.5. We'll put that just so you've got it. And your rent for 2-bedroom probably 500.
Yeah, just leave it at 500. I mean,
so your gross yield on that is 7.5% in here in that scenario.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the 6,000 divided by the 75. Your gross yield with the mortgage is 10.7%. So in other words, using a mortgage, sorry, that's the wrong mortgage. It should be 75. That should be 70. That should be 75. So it should be 25 down there. So it's actually 7.5, and you leverage your position to almost 12% with 75% mortgage on a buy-to-let interest only. Just using that, because really down there, all your money in is your deposit.
I was just going to say, go and explain that, because people might wonder how is it that, because if you're doing
you've
cash,
got your ADS 6.5, 4.5. You've got your 18,750 as your deposit, plus your 1,000 there is that £24,250.
So that's what your money in.
That is then divided by this. So actually the gross profit here, 2875.31 is the mortgage minus the rent. So that's the 2875 divided by the 24,250, because that's the money you've got in, gives you an 11.9% gross yield after the mortgage.
After the mortgage, yeah.
Anybody on TikTok and Instagram, if you want to see this, go on to YouTube, Fife Properties TV, and we're running live right now. If you want to see it later, just go on and look up the playlist. On YouTube, look up the playlist for the one on the live stream is buy to let and Fife still worth the risk, and look further in at 1 hour and 5 minutes. We've been going that long. Jeez, I talk too much. I kind of think everybody wants to know the answers though.
It's quite a good topic to cover, to be fair.
The 30% overheads is repairs and improvements I put in for a property. That might be a lot less, by the way, and managing agent as well. Net profit is over £1,000, which is a 4.4% net return on deposit. That's net return on deposit. Now, that's not a great return. However, once interest rates start to drop and you maybe get better deals at 4%, that jumps up to 8%. So, and then also it doesn't take into account capital appreciation, which will work over the medium to long term, which is not added on there as well. So in that scenario, it looks like I'm not getting out of my bed for 4.4% net return on deposit. But then when you look at a 10-year payback at 5% appreciation each year, now just to be prudent, we'll put it in as 2. Then your return on investment actually in total is 106% over 10 years. So it may not look like much in isolation, but compounded over a 10-year period, your return is over 100% on your investment. I don't know any investment house that gets that much, in all honesty. So that hopefully that's given everybody a real.
I think that's quite good. It's quite good to demonstrate the example. It is really about all the numbers and how the numbers make it work. If your numbers don't add up, then maybe you move on to another investment, and that's how you go through the process of elimination when you're property sourcing and things.
Jamie says too much legislation coming in and landlords being squeezed adds tax too much. Yeah, it can be too much, Jamie, and that's great. Hopefully everybody will exit the market and I'll be the last man standing and I'll earn a fortune, because the reality is they'll need me anyway regardless. They've got a homelessness crisis on their hands. They have no choice but to come to us. Even though they don't admit it right now, they've got no choice but to come to us. They don't have any choice. They can't build houses overnight, and they can't magic money from thin air. Well, they can, because they've just magicked 100,000 for something the day the council, and they're like, how did you manage that? You can't even fix the potholes and get your.
I think he commented there about obviously the increase in legislation, and there is a lot of legislation, but I mean, Jim, you know how much time and resource I use as an agent to keep up to date with that. So the answer is, if you're an investor or a landlord and worried about that, get somebody to do it for you.
That's it. Like, if you could earn 40, 30, 50 quid an hour, if you're a self-employed contractor and you're an electrician, you're earning 100 quid an hour. Why on earth are you trying to dabble in your buy-to-let when it only takes the less than the price of a cup of coffee every single day for someone else like us to manage it?
Yeah, and we do.
It's like, that is literally about 60 quid a month. If you could earn 100 quid an hour as an electrician in your business, why on earth are you spending that time actually trying to do your buy-to-let at saving 60 quid a month? It's a false economy. It's like, just stick to being an electrician and do that, or swing a hammer and be a craftsman at what you do, because you're getting an absolute fortune in comparison to paying somebody to be a letting agent. I keep saying to people, and it's no derogatory, it's like, somebody's got to wash my car. In other words, somebody's got to let my property. That's the same sort of thing. It's like,
it's the same premise. It's the exact same premise.
With a limited time I've got, if I could earn in these hours a lot more money than it costs a letting agent to do it, or a cleaner to clean my house, or somebody to do my lawn, or anything like that, then for God's sake, go and earn that money and get somebody else to do it, because the marginal difference that you're making is a profit. Funny enough, that's how industry works. But that's the way you should work, isn't it? That's the way the world. That's the way. If you could earn more somewhere else, then pay a letting agent to do it for you. False economy. People didn't get that. Then you get bad tenants, and very quickly you're running a massive risk. Yeah, but you screen bad tenants out by getting a good letting agent, because often this is why the 272%. That's where that comes from, and more than 2 months in arrears than what it is for a letting agent, for a landlord that's self-managed, because more bad tenants are attracted easily to direct to landlords, because they don't. Most landlords don't know the stringent steps you have to go through in order to filter out the bad tenants. But most bad tenants then realise that they're going to get caught if they go to a letting agent about their previous history. Therefore, they don't go to the letting agents; they go to the landlords, and that's why landlords attract the bad tenants. Letting agents very rarely do because of that, because the bad tenants know they'll screen them out. I just sold my portfolio as I'd rather use the money and now use it making more money quicker. Hey, Jamie, tell me what that is. Because
I was just going to say, tell us what that is.
I'll do that as well, if that's the case. I better not be crypto, by the way. I think buy-to-lets will be managed by big companies, not smaller landlords. You're absolutely right. Here's his comment. Buy-to-lets, the government just wants to deal with a few big landlords. Yeah. We know the ramifications of having corporate landlords and what that'll mean for tenants. But the government doesn't bother about that. They just want to deal. They don't want the itsy-bitsy landlords. They don't want one or two.
Don't want to deal with the masses, the people individually.
Want to deal with individuals. Would rather just have a corporate bank do it. And it's like, well, you reap what you sow. I tell you what, because a corporate bank will no bother about evicting anybody, and they'll have more clout with you as the government because they'll have all the power. Remember, the companies are controlled, and the world is honestly controlled by people like Vanguard and BlackRock, who own the majority stakes in most of the top companies in the world. So when they turn around to say, we're going to invest in a country, what do you think the government does? Just walk all over us. What do you want? Do you want the legislation to change to get that investment in our country? Absolutely. Do you want to create more jobs? Yep. What else do you want from it? Oh, we want to do this, we want to do that, we want you to change this, we want subsidies for this and subsidies for that. And the governments just go, yeah, okay, then we're happy to do that. That's why the European legislation actually put in place that you weren't allowed to do that because that would be deemed as an uncompetitive advantage. So there was restrictions with the European Union actually for member nations to compete against each other by saying we'll give you loads of subsidies to come and build a factory where we were, and there was laws against it.
Yeah.
Let me just cover a few others. I know a landlord who's 50 properties, and I've said them for 20 years. I know a few as well, actually. Taken from him by the banks. Yeah, I know landlords basically got all their properties taken from them, the banks in the credit crunch, but I know the lessons that were learned out of that. Somebody said, why worst place in Glasgow and not the worst place in Fife? That was obviously the example. It says Coca-Cola. Listen, it could be the worst place anywhere. Every places have got their good and bad places. It doesn't matter where you are. St Andrews has got its good and bad places.
Yeah. That's everywhere.
Everybody's got their good and bad places. It's the first thing. It's an example who actually my mentors came from. They actually came from Glasgow. So there's no stereotyping Glaswegians as derogatory. Go and do one, eh? It's like your typical TikToker, eh? It's like probably got nothing, no done anything for anyone at all, anywhere, not helped anybody as a result, and you're quite happy to castigate everybody else as well. It's like you just don't go on the channel, don't listen to us, just go and listen to someone else. Okay, that's it, guys. Yeah. Hopefully I've given you a good insight into that. And we've given you a good insight into the market as well, and whether buy-to-let is good or not. If you've got any further questions, please feel free to ask us. And until next time, guys, it's bye-bye from him.
And bye-bye from him. Go ahead. Right, Jim, that was good.